is something that has been characterized pretty well. And the guys at Pag-asa, very admirable people, our weather forecasters, did a great job in forecasting what would happen with Typhoon Yolanda. They told us where it would make landfall, how strong the winds were going to be. They even told us about the possible storm surge. And if you listened to the clip earlier, if you watched it, you will remember that I even made a report several times about the storm surge, which would reach how high? 15 feet, around 2 people. But even if we had advance warning in this case, the challenge of communicating in a 2-minute report, usually this is the length of reports for TV in prime time, it's easy enough to understand why we have to refine or we have to become better at communicating, because you have to say life and death information in a span of 2 minutes. One of the haunting things that we learned in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan is that a lot of people actually did not truly understand how serious the risks were. In the hardest hit areas of Samar and Leyte, residents did not know what a storm surge was and how deadly it could be. And as a reporter, I have to admit that I was also surprised with what we saw. It's a one-of-a-kind event, but even so, if there's a better way of explaining what the hazards are, we can literally save thousands of lives. So effective communication during emergency situations remains a big challenge. Next slide, please. Logistics is only one part of the equation. Covering disasters on the scale of Haiyan or Yolanda requires more careful planning on a physical, mental, and organizational level. For reporters, obviously we have to be somewhat physically fit for the demands of the job. But how does one take care of his or her mental health, of course, when covering events like this? It's something that I don't think is as discussed, and it should be across the industry. We deal with a lot of stories of heartbreak, of loss, families that lose loved ones, some are missing. We deal with these kinds of stories on a daily basis when covering typhoons such as Haiyan and other natural disasters. So how does one deal with the traumatic stories we usually encounter? And more importantly, how do journalists cope when we ourselves are faced with huge challenges, for example, when food and water become scarce, or when security also becomes a problem for the team? I think that there should be, and there could be, a clear set of standards that could be made standard across the industry. Next slide, please. Before a calamity, if it can be forecasted like a typhoon or volcanic eruptions to a certain extent, is ostensibly to provide information that will help save lives. As it is unfolding, we go into spot reporting. So we break the story, and through the stories, number one, we inform people in other areas which are not affected by the event that this is happening at this moment in this area. At the same time, people who are just tuned in those areas can actually get useful information that will also save lives. Now, when we talk this, and we were, but at the same time, how does one strike a balance between showing pictures that people who watch TV are actually looking for and actually find useful, and which images should we avoid altogether? For example, when we cover calamities, if you guys watch the news, we cover a lot of grief. So some people seem to think that covering grief is a form of what they call grief pornography. So you tell the story about people who, once again, lost loved ones or lost their property. And after a while, if you watch news report after news report telling us about the great amount of suffering of our fellow Filipinos, what is the level of grief that we are actually, should we aim for, in a way? At the same time, are there images that should be avoided? In other countries, for example, they have other standards where they don't show bodies. Is that something that should be adopted also in the Philippines? So these are things that are still in discussion and are truly evolving every time we cover disasters like this. In the aftermath of a disaster, things get more complicated. And it becomes especially challenging for journalists who are in the field. Because you have to strike the right tone between telling the people or giving them a feedback of, for example, how the rescue efforts or the rehabilitation efforts are going. But some people might think that if you criticize the relief efforts too much, it might also be counterproductive. So how does one strike the right tone between being critical of the rescue efforts and also being supportive of people who are doing everything they can to help other people? The ethical dilemma might not be as clear when we talk about it in the aftermath of something like this, but we have to grapple with these issues every time we cover disasters. Next slide, please. From the person who will naturally want to reach out and help. Journalists also have some resources and critical information that people need during crisis situations. So aggregating and vetting information that can aid rescue efforts is one of our key responsibilities and our key contributions. An industry-wide standard, or a template perhaps, or a central database where we can deposit data such as missing persons or casualty figures could prove useful, since media workers are often also first responders. Public service can be as simple as providing relief or just emotional support to people who have lost so much. For example, in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan, aside from food and water, getting in touch with loved ones was one of the most important things for people in Tacloban City since communication lines went down. Survivors actually flocked to our satellite setup, hoping to send a message to relatives that they were safe, that they needed help, and that they wanted to evacuate. Even though we did not have a direct line or a telephone to the outside community or in other cities in Metro Manila, we had to do what we can just to provide that relief to the survivors. So we started listing down the names of people who wanted to get the message out, and we put down where they were, just basic information. And even though we did not have a telephone, we would manually carry all of these notes to our systems or our base in Cebu through helicopter, and there, these were encoded manually and uploaded to the internet. This was a painstaking job, and it actually took away from the focus of just covering the news in Tacloban and in other areas in Eastern Visayas, but it's something that we feel that we have to do. In our experience, people rely on media for services that government may not be able to provide at that time. As such, it is ingrained in the operations of Abs-Cbn. But how do we make that balance between the deployment of resources and manpower between news gathering and public service? This is also something that we discuss every day. Next slide, please. And the audience seems to like seeing me get in scary situations. So Red Alert is a program that we air every Fridays. And the purpose of the program is to prepare the audience to deal with dangerous situations that we usually encounter in the Philippines. So, upper left, can anyone guess what that is? What situation that is?
Hold up.
Yes, well actually, close enough. It's actually an abduction scenario. Upper right is capsizing of a boat. Lower left is taking care of your pet. Rabies. And bottom right is flash floods. So aside from this regular program that we have every Friday on Abs-Cbn, we also have a radio program with Professor Buhar Lagmay, who will be speaking with you in a few minutes, where we also discuss all of these hazards with another expert, Dr. Dennis Guerra. And as you can see, it's actually a holistic campaign by Abs-Cbn because we felt that we should be able to talk about disasters not only during these moments that are life and death, but also way beyond these events. Para pag nangyari, alam na natin yung gagawin. And this is a campaign that, without talking to each other, is actually happening to different organizations and media groups, including GMA7 and TV5. We all have our own campaigns because we feel that as a public service, media should be able to provide this kind of information to viewers because it really does save lives. And it is continually evolving, and we would love to have feedback from the viewers as well if you think the campaign is effective or if you think the communication is actually getting through to many of our kababayans, especially in the areas that are affected by these calamities. Next slide, please. This is an example of the importance of being prepared. In disaster scenarios, the focus usually is put on the event itself. Yun yung naalala natin. It's November 8, 2013. But the emphasis should be beyond that time. Halimbawa, ngayon, habang wala pa nangyayaring malaking disaster, dapat pinag-uusapan na natin. And that's why this is a great platform to talk about disaster risk reduction, not only among media people, but also across the industry, including business and other stakeholders. So these are just some of the lessons that we learned during our coverage, and I believe we have time for some questions. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and just ask us. Thank you very much.